Last of Us Episode 3. This was a very heavy one to sit through, but certainly not in a bad way. This time, we actually get to see the friendship, or the connection, however you want to put it, between Bill and Frank, which we get a hint of in the first game. If you recall, Bill tells Joel that there was, a long time ago, somebody he had to look after, a partner. Eventually, they come across the guy's remains, who was bitten by infected and killed himself to avoid turning into one. Now, the game never really explicitly says if they were lovers, but I think there was enough hints or suggestions to give you the idea that, yeah, they were involved romantically in some capacity. Some people will debate whether or not it's actually true, but given Neil Druckmann's interest in portraying characters who are part of the LGBTQ community, it doesn't really surprise me, especially with the magazine that Ellie finds later on in the game, which has to do with guys having sexual relations with each other. Bill's looking at something like that. Odds are he's probably gay. And this partnership he had with Frank was probably somewhere along those lines. Bill in the game is very standoffish and very distrustful of other people that he doesn't know. In this episode they translate that, but we get to see that he's a very Alex Jones type of person who believes that 9/11 was an inside job or that the government is secretly part of the New World Order. He's somehow able to avoid all the Fedra soldiers from taking him into the quarantine zone in Boston, so eventually when his town is abandoned, he goes to all the neighboring stores and taking all the supplies he needs. This episode covers the whole 20-year time span, from Bill's perspective at least. He eventually meets Frank, who falls into one of his traps outside, and despite Bill's initial resistance, he starts to form a bond with him when they bond over a song by Linda Ronstadt. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I know of the person, but I've never really listened to her music. But there's one thing that The Last of Us series and the show has made me really curious about. It's made me check out other musical artists that I never would have listened to otherwise. Like Pearl Jam, or the one song that plays where it sounds like it's a David Bowie song, but it's not really David Bowie. You guys know what I'm talking about if you watch the episode. Inevitably, Frank and Bill's connection grows into a romance, eventually dying as an elderly couple, so to speak. This was a rather unexpected turn and a huge deviation from the game that I was really surprised that Bill went out the way he did when he eventually drank all that other stuff that he was going to give to Frank. That way he can die with him and not live in the world without him. I know it's probably bothered some people that they deviated from the game. This is to be expected when you have adaptations. In some shape or form there's going to be a deviation, but I think the core or spirit of the message is still there. If you really love or care about somebody that much, are you really willing to live in a world without them? This all comes into play with Joel and Ellie as their bond starts to grow more deeper over time, which we see little bits of starting to slowly break through as they're talking about how the infection broke out, how certain people were killed by Fedra regardless of whether or not they were infected, when they see that plane crash down on a hillside nearby. When that image was released some months back, I literally thought it was a screenshot from the game that never made it to the final cut, but I realized when I looked back at Ellie's hairstyle that it was Bella Ramsey. It almost felt to me like I was watching a video game cutscene come to life in that particular moment. And at one point when they go into this abandoned building where Joel has some weapons stashed away, Ellie sees a crushed stalker nearby that's still trying to crawl its way out, and she stabs him in the head. And it makes you realize that Ellie is definitely not shy about protecting herself if she has to. Joel's still not trusting her with a gun, but that'll change in about an episode or two, especially when she stole that one gun from Bill's house. And I like seeing that little detail. Ellie's a rebellious kid by nature. She's not the kind of person to listen to authority. But back to Bill and Frank, we see them disagree over whether or not they should let people into their lives. They show us how they met Joel and Tess. I guess Frank got in touch with them as he sent out radio communications to anyone who was listening, because in the game, Joel and Frank never met. He never even heard of him. But in a way, you get to see how Joel and Bill met and how he relies on Bill to get him the supplies he needs since they're living in the quarantine zone in Boston. This small moment where Bill gets very giddy about the strawberries that Frank has grown, with the sun peeking through the trees, it was some of the most heartwarming imagery that I've ever witnessed in entertainment, period. It was a beautiful moment. I don't want to bring this up, but I know some people are upset over the fact that a gay couple is being showcased in this series. As I said earlier, Neil Druckmann is very passionate about portraying characters from that community. I'm not going to name any certain YouTubers because I saw a few that were upset about this. People like this exist in the real world, whether you like to admit it or not. I don't really see a need to go any further than that because there's better people to talk about this kind of stuff in ways that I would not be able to articulate. You can disagree with me on this, but I think it's perfectly fine to have representation in this show. I don't really see it as them trying to force it in people's faces. They don't portray the relationship as like a really big deal or, oh my god, we're having a gay relationship, it's so wonderful. They could have easily said that, but they don't. And I could be totally wrong here, but I don't think Neil Druckmann's the kind of guy to try to push some kind of an agenda like that. All that aside, this episode was very emotional. Just seeing the two bond together and grow old together. Frank come down with some kind of a degenerative illness and asking Bill to euthanize him. It's heart-wrenching. Literally, I almost started crying. Bill's one of those kind of guys who acts like a big giant rough grizzly bear on the outside, but underneath it all, he's a big teddy bear. Or, as my mom would say, a big puddle of chocolate. And I like how they don't show the dead bodies when Joel and Ellie drive away. We see the open windows since Bill didn't want the house to have a really big stench from the dead bodies inside. The camera slowly pans backwards inside the bedroom. We don't see the dead bodies. I kind of almost expected them to be seen, but I thought, oh, I don't think that's gonna happen. And then it cuts to credits before they could even go whoop. Sometimes what you don't see is more effective. And probably the biggest strength so far from this series is that we're able to see how the rest of the world reacted to this cordyceps. We see it from Bill's perspective as the soldiers are rounding up people in his neighborhood. In the games, we see little notes throughout these areas that we go to in these various levels, giving you an idea of how people dealt with the outbreak. But in this series, so far at least, we see other parts of the country and other parts of the world and how they dealt with the outbreak. I really like how we're seeing how the rest of the world reacted, because I think naturally, not just myself, but other people probably wondered, how did Germany or Japan or Indonesia or Canada react to this stuff? Best scene so far is when they're in Indonesia and that doctor tells that cop to bomb the hell out of that city. And when we see Ellie look at the dead bodies of skeletons on the ground, and she asks Joel, how come they were shot? Joel says dead people don't get infected. Like this little moment here in the first game.
Why would they mow down all these people?
You can't let everyone in.
So they killed them?
Dead people don't get infected. You sacrifice the few to save the many.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
I also really like Joel's reaction to when he hears Ellie reading the suicide note out loud, but it specifically mentions Tess. Joel is asked by Bill to protect those who you love. After losing Sarah, Tess was all that he had, and now he's with this kid that he doesn't even want to be with. But we all know eventually how the relationship between the two is going to go down. Still remaining standoffish, but slowly starting to realize that maybe I actually do like this kid. Little moments you see here and there as they talk, but it's realistic and it's gradual. Things like that don't happen overnight. Still plenty of it left to go, but so far, probably the most emotionally raw the show has been to date. 3 episodes in, every single one is a home run. And just a little side note, Bella Ramsey did say in some interview recently that she's excited to explore the relationship between Ellie and Dina. So, just the thought of part 2 coming eventually, however they adapt it, that gets me really excited. So that's all I gotta say about episode 3. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.